So I welcome you to Psalm 67, which there are no coincidences, is in honor of Thanksgiving.
Unbelievable.
And it's short, as we were saying in our little conversation before, these 7+1 verses. One, because the first line is the inscription, the introduction. And then there's 7 verses that will be commonly in post Sfat 16th century mysticism a focal point for prayer, and in the shape of a menorah. And you'll see these verses, there are 7 verses, as was the menorah in the time of the temple. There are 49 words, and this psalm is commonly recited during the 49 days between Passover and Shavuot for the counting of the Omer, which the rabbis, again, those 16th century forward mystical rabbis, saw those 7 weeks of the counting of the Omer as a journey through the 7 dimensions of God's attributes, which are part of our inner life, as we try to refine ourselves moving toward Shavuot. And a great contemporary commentator like Adin Steinsaltz, who has a commentary on Psalms, will say that this psalm is likewise a journey toward higher levels of elevation. I'll start, because it's Thanksgiving tomorrow, with first a little bit of why this is a Thanksgiving psalm. In the Talmud, there's a description of Sukkot, and there's 3 qualities that define the biblical holiday of Sukkot. One, it's a time of rejoicing. It distinctly, Sukkot is called Zman Simchatenu, the time of our happiness. It's a holiday linked to harvest. That's part of the reason for celebration. It's the harvest holiday. It's also a time of gathering. And remarkably, if we think of Thanksgiving and Sukkot, it's a time where the Puritans, the Pilgrims, so I saw in one of my tweets that this is the 400th anniversary of
Yeah.
Thanksgiving this year. And so the image of Thanksgiving is those early pilgrims with the indigenous people coming together. And back to Sukkot, it is a distinctively universal holiday as understood by the rabbis, in that during the 7 days of Sukkot, there are 70 bulls brought in total. And that number 70 for the rabbis represents the nations of the world. So that Sukkot, in the aftermath of the forgiveness of Yom Kippur, is a time of wholeness in which there is a messianic kind of unity. And remarkably, the day after the 7 days of Sukkot in the Bible, there's only one bull brought. And that added holiday is called Shmini Atzeret. And the rabbis will say it's the 8th day. Again, the holiday is 7, in which God says, after all these holidays, Tatsur, stop, stay one more day so that I can give my attention to you, having been involved with all the nations of the world. And you'll see in this psalm, there is a touch of that, at least for the commentators. So what I'd like to do first is read the psalm. Then I'll go back and talk about how it's also a commentary on the priestly blessings. You'll see that in verse 2. And then a little bit of a talk with a wonderful text from the Zohar on how this psalm was written by the angels and the wind and David at midnight. So, adding to its importance, Psalm 67 as a psalm of elevation and celebration. With that, a shorter psalm to look at together, Psalm 67. I'll add that my choice of translation of thanks, which is 2 verses. Verses 6, 4, and 6 are the same verse. Back to the menorah image, all the verses are couplets except for the middle verse, verse 5, which is a triplet of phrases. It's the longest one because it's the longest stem. I'll show you a picture of how this gets drawn into a menorah. But 4 and 6 are the same verse. May peoples give thanks to you, God. May peoples, all of them, give thanks to you. Some, like the King James Version or the Steinsaltz translation, will use the word praise rather than thanks. But in light of it being a psalm of harvest, and the words can be either, and like all the more since tomorrow's Thanksgiving, it's entitled Thanks instead of Praise. Verse 1. For the conductor with niginot, a psalm, a song. May God bestow grace upon us and bless us. May God cause God's face to shine within us, Selah. To make intimately known on earth your ways among all nationalities, your deliverance. May people give thanks to you, God. May people, all of them, give thanks to you. Let nations be happy and sing for joy. For you will judge peoples with equity, and to the nations upon earth may you guide them, Selah. May people give thanks to you, God. May peoples, all of them, give thanks to you. Earth has yielded her produce. Bless us, God, our God. May you bless us, God, and may they revere God, all the ends of the earth. Now, I yesterday mentioned a lot about Samson Raphael Hirsch, that important teacher and commentator of Frankfurt, Germany of the 19th century. He sees the following progression in this psalm. 1 and 2 for him are about the Jewish people. And again, there's Selah. Selah is a musical notation, but one that often marks a division. 3 to 5 he sees as addressed to the leaders of the nations. And then 6 to 8, all peoples having come together. That's just one way to see a division. What's clear is that verse 2 stands alone, 3 to 5, because of the Selah, and then 6 to 8. So let me begin at the beginning, pacing myself because I'm eager to share this Zohar text and to show you the picture of the menorah. I'm saying it out loud, so I pace myself. The opening, verse 2, begins with the name God. So, may God. Here's one other thing to know in terms of translation. All the verbs in this short psalm are, except for 2 exceptions, imperfect. Remember, in Hebrew, there's just 2 tenses, imperfect and past perfect. Imperfect can have 4 different possible understandings of such a verb. It can be in the present, which is. It can be hopeful, jussive, which means may it be. It can be hortative, which can be let. I often go back and forth between the mays and the lets. And it can be an assured future. It will be. So in translations, and again, there's so many translations, those are 4 different possibilities of how each of the verbs can be understood. Present, future, jussive, may it be, or let it be. All right, that's again back to the insertion of the word may. So, may God bestow grace upon us. Vivarchenu, and bless us. And the word bless will be then opening and closing. So this is a prayer. This is universal. but it begins with a resonance to the priestly blessings. And some understand this as a farewell poem for the pilgrims, whether on Sukkot, and it will become a Sukkot psalm. It'll become, again, that psalm recited every night of the counting of the Omer. But in its origin, some say this was written by the priests who, in the time of the temple, every day, as the pilgrims would gather, would do the priestly blessings. That's Numbers 6, 24 to 26. Those blessings are remarkable in that there are only 15 words, 3, 5, and 7. Remarkable in their construction, and they were widely known. Those were the blessings. You would go to the temple the moment of the priest blessing you, and they begin with Yevarechecha, may God bless you. But the middle one, this is similar, and so Ya'er Adonai panav elecha vichuneka is the middle of 3 verses, right? Verse 25. May God bless you. And wait 1 second. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha. May God shine God's light upon you. Vichuneka, and bestow grace upon you. That's the middle one. That's what's reflected here in verse 2. But there's a very interesting turn, and that is Ya'er Adonai panav. And first one is that it's Adonai, Yud He Vav He in Numbers, the more intimate name, the more Israelite name. Here it's Elohim, the more universal name of God. And instead of may God shine God's face upon you, here it's Itanu, which is with us or within us. Now that'll become important for later commentators who will see this again as a menorah psalm that will say when you study this as a menorah and you meditate on it, you will find yourself kindled with that light from within, and you will become the menorah. Here God is shining within us. But there's another dimension that the commentators will point out, and that is the blessing of Abraham. God's first words to Abraham, Genesis 12, in which he's told, V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, all the nations will be blessed through you. That's part of the charge, the call of Abraham. And that's where it continues. It continues with God as if God, or if you will, the priests are blessing the people, but there's this messianic dimension to make intimately known on earth your ways. And the word, verse 3, earth, is again one of those reoccurring words. It's like every other verse. Verse 3, verse 5, verse 7, and then it's the last word of the psalm. But the word eretz, or earth, is used to be a description both of the peoples of the earth and the land physically of the earth in both directions. But it suggests, as this is this universal psalm, that through Israel, through Abraham's extended clan, all peoples will be blessed. So it begins with God blessing, or the priest blessing, but the trajectory, the canvas is so much bigger. To make, verse 3, to make intimately known on earth your ways. And here, Ba'aretz darkecha, on the earth your ways, is another expression, and that is derech eretz, is the expression already of the rabbis of the Talmud. So ripe for both learning it from here, but building on it. To be ethical is to be following, to be a person who goes beyond the letter of the law, is derech eretz, the way of the land, which is in the word lada'at, verse 3, that's like, Adam knew Chava, his wife. So dea is an intimate knowing. You make intimately known on earth your ways among all nationalities, b'chol goyim. So in Yiddish, goy, right, often means the Gentile. Some people use it pejoratively in terms of a Yiddish culture of subjugation or fear, but it's a neutral term meaning nations, your deliverance. And it continues with three different words used for all the nations. There's goyim, that's the first. You get the word am, now verse 4, and you'll get amim in verse 5. Synonyms on some level, which commentators will give little different nuances to. But verse 4, may peoples give thanks to you, God. May people, all of them, give thanks to you. And now the middle verse, it's surrounded, verse 5, by the same verse 4 and 6, the same words. So now the longest of those verbs. Here's something to know. Now I'm going to pause. Back to the menorah. Verse 2 is 7 words. Verse 3 is 6 words. Verse 4 is 6 words. Verse 5 is 11. Verse 6 is 6. Verse 7 is 6. And verse 8 is 7. It's perfectly symmetrical in its composition. And so the middle verse, verse 5, let nations be happy and sing for joy, for you will judge peoples with equity, and to the nations upon earth may you guide them. As you may know, I'm often fascinated with what's the middle word, the bullseye of a psalm. The middle word is you shall judge, tishpot. You will judge peoples with uprightness, meaning the celebration of this psalm, which includes, as we'll see, harvest, is at its core God's justice. That's the cause for feeling blessed, to live in a world in which the Creator is a judge of equity of all peoples. And so you get the refrain, may peoples give thanks to you, God. May peoples, all of them, give thanks to you. Verse 7, here's the harvest. Earth has yielded her produce. Bless us, God, our God. I gave you that description of Sukkot and then that added day with the Shmini Atzeret, which God gives Israel attention. So the added word here, our God, one of the great teachers of Hasidism, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, said that this is the reward, our God. That if Israel indeed lives in a way that models justice, that is a light to others, that fulfills Abraham's promise of being a person who pursues justice, then other nations will follow Israel in worshiping God. And in the midst of that success, God will say to the star student, the exemplar, I have a special relationship with you. You are Eloheinu, our God. And now the closing pulls it together, verse 8. May you bless us. So again, as it opened with blessing, may you bless us, God, and may they revere God, kol afsei aretz, all the ends of the earth, back to the universal. So there's this kind of back and forth between the pilgrim, the Israelite, with a mission that's universal, and God being a judge of equity for all in celebration. Benji Siegel entitles this particular psalm Ideal to Believe in, IDYLL. So there's this idyllic dimension of this psalm. It's short. Let me show you the menorah at this point. 1 second. This is how the verses are laid out, with the 7 verses. And you can see the middle verse is the longest. As I said, that's 11 words. When we studied together Psalm 16:8, we talked about Shavitis. Psalm 16, verse 8 is Shaviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I will always place you before me. And we looked at a number of those Jewish mandalas. Well, this menorah of Psalm 67 is the most common image on a Jewish mandala. So the psalm we're at now, Psalm 67, which felt a long way away when we were studying Psalm 16, the image of Psalm 16 is, I will always place you before me, which in a tradition that was not oriented to representational art, did create a very developed religious art that was often before the prayer leader, and usually with this menorah as part of that focal point. For the rabbis will say, there is a teacher born in Spain in 1480. His name was Rabbi Meir ben Ezekiel ibn Gabbai to 1540 when he would be in Tzfat. And that was the emergence of Tzfat in the 16th century of this creative surge of Jewish mysticism. Well, this particular teacher from Spain to Tzfat would say, when you study this menorah and you use it as a focal point for meditation, for prayer, it provides protection for you and success. Dimensions, again, of the theme of this psalm. So that's one of many different examples of how the verses enable this perfectly symmetrical menorah. I'll add another piece in terms of the mystical commentary. The menorah in the temple had to be made from one piece of gold. In that sense, the menorah became, again, for those mystical commentators, the model of multiplicity within unity, right? One piece of gold. And I'll add one other piece of those mystical commentaries. Rashi, the great Bible commentator of France of the 11th century, commenting on Exodus 25:35, which describes the menorah, will say there are 42 parts, bowls, knobs, and flowers, plus the 7 branches equals 49. So this becomes, in terms of the 49 words, an added reinforcement that the menorah of the temple and the menorah psalm, Psalm 67, are one and the same. And so here is a little reading from the Zohar. It's actually taken from an essay. I could see this scholar who wrote this called The Menorah Psalm, Schubert Spiro. So he cites the following image from the Zohar. So I'm going to read you a paragraph in the 5 minutes we have to show you how, with all those elements, for these mystics, right? Tzfat, Zohar. Zohar is earlier. That's 1300 when it gets edited. But this psalm becomes not just the words of a priest. This becomes, they would write, first shown to Moses. So when Moses says to God, how do I construct the menorah? It says in the Torah that God showed Moses. And for the mystics, what did God show Moses? Psalm 67 in the form of a menorah. But here's the story of David and Psalm 67. Rabbi Elazar, who is the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai is the mystic who's traditionally given prime credit for writing the Zohar. So his son, Rabbi Elazar, the two men who hid out in the cave for 13 years amidst Roman persecution. Rabbi Eliezer meditated on the words of Psalm 67, God be merciful to us, right? Verse 2, Chanenu. Said Rabbi Elazar, King David rose and praised and thanked the Holy King. He was studying Torah at the moment when the north wind rose and touched the strings of his lyre so that it made music. Now, what was the song of the lyre? See now. When the Holy One moves toward the chariots and the hosts to give nourishment to all those supernal beings, all are filled with joy and song. They began, this is now the angels, they're hymning with the words, God be merciful to us and bless us and cause God's face to shine upon us. That's verse 2. And the harp, which was on David's door, the lyre, when it is played upon by that wind, so the wind came, and the wind would sing coming through the lyre. Now verse 4, let all peoples praise you, O God, let all peoples praise. As for David, when he was awakened with the Holy Spirit having moved him, he sang, and now verse 7, then shall the earth yield her increase, and God, even our God, shall bless us. God shall bless us in all the ends of the earth. That's actually verse 5. This he's saying so as to draw down the goodness of the Holy One from above to the earth below. Later, David arranged all these verses into one song, Shir HaNiginot, the Song of the Harp. And so that's a description from the Zohar, how Psalm 67 is this combination in terms of its emergence between the angels beginning with the blessing, with the wind itself singing the verses as they awoke David every night with the north wind, which is an image from the Talmud, and that David so that the angels sing, the wind sings a song, and then David sings in response, the great hymn maker. And the rabbis then, with this kind of added dimension of the mystical origins of this psalm, would draw it into this menorah, and in Eastern Europe in particular, but in Sephardic communities as well, when the prayer leader would stand at the Amud, the prayer stand, this menorah of Psalm 67 was the invitation for both focus, but illumination like a menorah, becoming a vessel for God's blessing, God's light, and the image that the light was not just for those in the room. The light was a universal light as God was calling all into celebration. And so Psalm 67 seems well timed for Thanksgiving. It is the Thanksgiving psalm. Sukkot, the Thanksgiving holiday that the pilgrims, some say, modeled Thanksgiving on, and that took on, in Jewish mysticism, far more significance. With that, and with everybody on the screen, it's nice to see the screen together. A few reactions to Psalm 20. I did share with you in my mailing that creative reading of Psalm 67, which I might read at the very end if you didn't see it, as a Thanksgiving psalm. So to conclude with that in honor of Thanksgiving by Stephen Mitchell. Any reactions or questions about Psalm 67? Go ahead, Lainey.
Oh, thanks. So this was beautiful, really beautiful, with all the mystical meaning and the menorah and everything. But Fantastic. Thank you. So there was a really interesting show on PBS about the Pilgrims. I don't know if any of you saw that, like this past
No.
week. It's either American Masters or some PBS show. So if you have a chance, look for it because it really goes into depth how religious they were and all this and their troubles and travails and so. But thank you. This was great.
I did look just a little bit this morning because I wanted to double check the 400th anniversary. I'd only seen it on a Twitter and I didn't see it documented. But so when I went to Wikipedia this morning to look up Thanksgiving, I didn't get the exact date, but I did get the image of the leading American presidents. So Washington was the first to acknowledge a Thanksgiving celebration, but Lincoln was the first to call it as a national holiday. And then it was FDR who helped rearrange the time, who are three of the great luminaries of our own nation. And as a reminder of the history of Thanksgiving, that is again grounded in the Puritans' celebration of harvest, but it's not among themselves alone that Thanksgiving is celebrated. They did it again with the indigenous people, lending to this whole image of Psalm 67 that Thanksgiving is to be done to the source of creation. Any other thoughts or questions about Psalm 67? It's not Rich, but
No, I don't know how to change. I don't know how to change my iPad to my name. I tried everything, but
okay. Tell me again your first name.
Anyway, it's Mary.
Oh, good, thank you, Mary. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a new member. I just wanted to say on the article in the LA Times about the 400th anniversary, that really caught my eye too, and the parallel with the epidemic that wiped out 9 out of 10 indigenous Indians with the smallpox plague. Just unbelievable. But on Psalm 67, my favorite lines, like in prayer service, has always been line 2 and 3, and I love now to see it here in the Psalm. It's exactly what I'm praying for. May he, his countenance shine upon us, and your way be known on earth, and your salvation among all nations. Being the individual and then all of us. So anyway, I'm glad to see it here.
Well, I'm glad, Mary, that you again are coming back to the starting point. And I sense, in terms of the origins of this psalm, again, it was the priests who would bless the people. And so verse 2 reflects that quality of the priestly blessing, but with that significant change, which is not bless you, but bless within us. Itanu, often translated as upon us, but that's not truly the word in Hebrew, because they did it to kind of sound like the numbers, which is, Ye'er panav elecha, alecha is upon us, Itanu is within
us. Yeah.
Yeah, and alecha is upon you as a unit. This is back to your comment, Mary. There's a sense of each individual getting placed. It's in the plural, not the singular, as in the priestly blessing as well.
Yeah.
So let me just, because tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and everybody may not have read my letter, let me just close with reading the Stephen Mitchell, who's a literature poet, professor, an interpretive translation of Psalm 67. It's on page 118 in our Siddur, or Lev Shalem, and it seems well suited for our Thanksgiving tables. Bless us, Lord, with your peace. Make your light shine within us, so that your presence may be known and your love appear to all people. Let all earth's nations honor you, and all people shout out your praise. Christian, Muslim, and Jew, idol worshiper, agnostic, Buddhist, Taoist, scientist, brown-skinned, yellow, and white. Let wisdom speak in their hearts and justice light up their eyes. Let all of them feel your presence and sing out in the fullness of joy. So thank you all for sharing in Psalm 67. May it lead us all toward indeed a Thanksgiving where we may not be gathered how we would normally expect, and yet much to harvest in terms of Thanksgiving. So we conclude each time with Kaddish, so those honoring a loved one can bring that memory into our midst. If anybody would like to join, I invite you. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Bi'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute. B'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kudsha b'richu le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Osei shalom b'mamav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. Thanks to each of you for joining. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and a Shabbat Shalom on the other side. Next week on Tuesday, we'll continue with Psalm 68, which in contrast to today's psalm is 36 verses and an overview of biblical history. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Happy Thanksgiving.